the definitive 2026 Australian Open take is on the horizon on a brand new all surface show. Hit the subscribe button. I am David E.J. Berger. Welcome in my main man in Melbourne, Mr. Ace Previews himself. Steve, how are you doing on this glorious post US Open day? Post Australian Open. Wow, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Just a little bit ahead of yourself. Oh, look, it's I'm tired, but I am relieved that the tournament ended with a flurry of some really, really good matches. Because it wasn't looking great there for that period through the second week. But no, it's I say farewell as a Australian to the tour being on my time zone until next year. So a little bit sad in that regard, but no, it's good to get on the road to Roland Garros, which is a very windy road across a number of different continents.
Only over 100 days until Roland Garros. So the road is windy for sure and long at this point. You know, Steve, I was thinking about the calendar and re-racking it so that the Australian Open is actually the last slam instead of the first slam. Out of the box idea. But this stretch is just so long, and I do feel like February could be more of a down period, although we'd lose a bunch of tournaments, which are very exciting for people who actually follow the sport. And I want to do, we've talked about a short. It's like, now you discovered tennis through the Australian Open. Here's what's on the horizon, because I do feel like the sport picked up a lot of eyeballs over the fortnight here in Australia, especially with Alcaraz achieving the Grand Slam list. So a lot of people are interested in the sport that weren't before. That said, I do feel like people probably will not pay attention until, well, Indian Wells might be here in the States. Indian Wells might be something in Miami. But yeah, it's about to hit the back burner for a lot of living rooms until Roland Garros, sadly.
Yeah, look, Indian Wells and Miami just kind of gets crowbarred in there, doesn't it? Between a couple of different kind of patches of the tour. But look, I think particularly from the ATP perspective, they'd probably be maybe a little bit disappointed with the turnout in terms of top players they're getting down to the golden swing. Probably not looking as kind of potent in terms of the top names, but I think for the purists and the lovers of clay tennis and South American clay tennis, I think we'll still get a kick out of it. But yeah, look, there's lots of action. You also get kind of a bit of a weird kind of week here. We've got some Davis Cup stuff happening later in the week. We've got the tournament in France, and then we've got the transition over to kind of Dubai, and yeah, it's a little bit all over the shop, but we will do our best to navigate it. It's easy to, as I said, as a tennis lover, we're not looking for different countries to change time zones and things to tailor to us. We're charging ahead. I saw some of your American contingent being a little bit disappointed that they had to wake up in the middle of the night for.
Yeah, I don't know why you never know what's going to go viral, and I don't know why people really latched on to that guy who's obviously was a bit of an a-hole, but like people really flocked to put that guy in his place, which was interesting. Hey, they were not letting that pass.
No. And I think that's the thing, though. Like, how many times have we got up and watched tennis at a time that you wouldn't get up to do most other things? Like, and also, if you're really that caught up on it, watch it on replay and just turn your phone off for 3 hours. Like, it's really not that.
Let me just say something. If that guy is not tuned in to Delray or Dallas,
yeah,
who are you?
Yeah,
sir. If you can't watch Marcos Giron at 3 Eastern, then you shouldn't be tweeting that.
Oh dear, but no, look, we're through a pretty busy start of the year, and all systems go, I think, for the rest of 2026. So excited to see where the road takes us.
Let's talk about the hyperbole going on right now. Okay, actually, I want because I want to look back at the peak end because we're waiting. I mean, this show in particular mentioned how we were kind of waiting around for the memorable moment that was going to happen, and we got that. It delivered in the end, and we'll go over that. But I want to talk about what's happening right now and the days following, and the hyperbole surrounding Carlitos Alcaraz, who is an amazing player. But it's like people's minds have been zapped about some of these guys who literally just ended their careers called the big three. And I'm not saying that Alcaraz can't be in the conversation with them for, one of the best of all time, but you have national U.S. columnists saying he's the best player he's ever seen. And this is an older guy who covered the sport for a long time and someone who, I respect, but geez, OP, it's like, we already forgot Nadal. We already forgot. I don't know. It just, I don't know why. I feel like people have to have takes. We live in a take culture, and when you see a kid like Alcaraz, rise, and you want to have some sort of take surrounding it instead of just enjoying it. I get that, but at the same time, you don't have to like go overboard. And also, he's still developing as a player. This is a kid who lost to David Goffin within the calendar year, number one. Like, that wasn't even 52 weeks ago. So he is awesome. I'm not denying that. I in particular, I mean, we called it on this show that he was going to win his first Australian Open. And we also said that the hype around the coach split was much ado about nothing. And
that's the thing. I think we've seen such a 180 and a pivot from people who have gone from, how's Carlos going to cope that a coach that he's had for years is no longer with him, to then now all of a sudden, he's surpassed all of these greats already. I think you can certainly make arguments in terms of relative to age and, number of tournaments and Grand Slams and everything that it does stack up really well. But I think you could also argue for a number of different players depending on what it depends, it's so subjective because it depends on what you rate as being important compared to others. And, for me, you probably go through pockets. Like, you would argue that Nadal's Roland Garros record is probably never going to be beaten or never going to come close to it.
no.
But how does that stack up, compared to when you talk about people across surfaces and that sort of thing? So yeah, it's been a dramatic month in terms of trying to find where the hot take is, I think, around
Well, think
the
about it this
Spaniard.
way, Steve. Like, less than a week ago, people were doing this tournament could have been an email chatter, and then on the flip side of the finish, we have now the greatest player in tennis history. So things changed, and I guess let's get into it. And you know what? It was actually moving for the men's side very straightforward because Alcaraz was cruising through those first two sets and even the third. I mean, I don't feel like until he popped up with those cramps, it felt like he was even going to drop that third set. And also, Steve, let's not forget he had love 30 on return, potentially to close out still with the cramps. And obviously, Zverev met the moment and forced the issue. But a little bit of divine intervention coming into play for at least that first match to kind of get the ball rolling on what turned out to be an incredibly memorable day / night on Rod Laver.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I didn't think this was something that I was going to say, but I do want to give a bit of a shout out. Oh, if you break the match up into sections, I do want to give a shout out to Alexander Zverev in a way. I remember watching it and watching that fifth set in particular, and when he broke Carlos instantly, my first thought was, oh, it's a long way to the finish line still for Alexander to have hit the lead. Like, you break Carlos in the first game of a set, you're still going to have to do a hell of a lot of work to be able to get over the finish line. And to Zverev's credit, what he did to be able to get to the point of even serving for the match, I thought was incredible in terms of the break points he saved, consistently finding himself, hanging on in terms of hanging on to that lead. Ultimately, Carlos was too good in terms of late in that piece, and I think Zverev physically hit a massive wall right towards the end. But I thought the German did a fantastic job. Ultimately, for him though, you probably need to look at it and go, well, did you can say that Zverev serving for the match, in the fifth set is where he lost it. But I think he actually really, when you go back and look at it, he lost it in the second set. If he shot out to a 5-2 lead. When you're in that position against Carlos, say, Zverev takes that second set 6-3, that takes away Alcaraz's ability to then have 2 hours off waiting to overcome his cramps. All of a sudden, Carlos is cramping at 1 set all and 4 games all, and it is a completely different question. And then you probably fast forward and go, well, you know what? I'd give Zverev a very good chance of beating Novak in the final based on what we saw and what we've seen between those two in the past. So I think that's where there's the missed opportunity, particularly for Zverev. But I thought he was incredible up until 5-4, basically in that fifth set. Then he went a little bit too passive, and when you are passive, you're just asking for Alcaraz to pass you, particularly when you're coming into the net with some balls that don't find themselves anywhere near a sideline or a baseline. But I thought, I don't think, you hear the words around choking and those sort of things. I mean, there wasn't a real double fault heavy performance or anything from Zverev. I just think he went a little bit too safe. And it's the safe that he has played, over a long period of time. But safe just doesn't work against Carlos. And I think we found that particularly from that 5-3 to 5-7.
An Achilles heel for Zverev over time is that safe play. I mean, he is the king of a point getting shared on social media where it's like a 31-point rally, and really it's just Zverev praying for someone to miss.
Yeah, and I think the bit that probably made it a little bit disappointing in those last couple of games is some of the forehands he hit in the first 8 games of that fifth set were some of the best forehands I've probably seen him hit ever. And I think that's been kind of the key thing. You looked at his win over Cam Norrie, and he was asked straight away on court afterwards, like, which part of the game do you think held up really well today? And he didn't hesitate, and he went straight to saying the forehand, which is not something we're used to Zverev saying. I think he is bridging the gap to these top guys, but it's you can bridge the gap as much as you want through the first 95% of a match. If you can't close out, we're going to find ourselves in situations like this. Probably at Roland Garros and probably at the US Open.
Yeah, I have to say at this moment here when he broke, I thought that the fitness was going to win out. The poor fitness, the fitness issues for Alcaraz were going to win out. And I don't want to say this match was going to have an asterisk, because if you're going to play that game, you should throw an asterisk on Sinner in his Wimbledon last year, when she was down 2 sets and Dimitrov had to pull out.
Yeah.
But I did think that Zverev was going to walk away with this. So what an unbelievable performance from the eventual champion in Carlitos to weather the storm. And I think, at this point, the 5-set format for Alcaraz, having that much time, even battling fitness issues, is just so deadly if you're facing him.
And look, I've probably been pretty strong on this over the last 4 to 6 months in particular. If you're playing the game where you're weighing up who is better out of Carlos and Yannick, I just don't think you can make a case for Yannick over best of 5. You can make a case as much as you want over best of 3, and I think that's probably the case where you probably give the slight edge to Sinner. But you look at Sinner's record when things go long, and you look at how Carlos finds his way out of these situations. You go back through probably, was it at least 4 of Carlos's Grand Slam titles, and there's situations like this. There's Zverev serving for the match. There's saving triple match point against Sinner at Roland Garros, and then Sinner serving for the match. I think you go back to some of the others that, there's instances where Alcaraz has been on the absolute brink and he's found a way through. I think when you look at this, you can probably make a case that Sinner's the better player over best of 3, but there's not even a discussion, I think, on who's better over best of 5. between those two.
That's
Maybe you make
usually,
a case for grass that Sinner can make that edge, but what you're not gonna,
I mean,
you
that's
look at it
only
over.
recently though, because that was his, obviously now he's a Wimbledon champion, but that was the surface he was needing to prove it upon, similar to Alcaraz proving it upon the hard courts in Australia, which he did. So they've both answered doubts over the last year or so and continue to establish themselves, even in a loss here for Sinner. And he is going to have, I guess that's the last link. Like between the two, Alcaraz and Sinner, what are the lingering questions for Alcaraz? Because now he's done it without the coach, the old coach. Now he's won all four. Sinner, I think, still has to prove that that win over 4 hours thing, and until he does that, I do think that there's going to be question marks of surrounding the Italian in terms of his matchup with the Spaniard and in general, really.
Yeah, and look, it does come back to, at the end of the day, like, there's been arguments for the last 6 months as to who's better out of Sinner and Carlos, and then all of a sudden Carlos wins one Grand Slam and he's the greatest of all time in some views.
I
So
mean,
like we're
no one
talking.
was even picking Alcaraz.
No, so that's the thing. So we're talking about really fine margins here, but I think when you look at it across the course of a fortnight of a Grand Slam, I think what we see at the moment is Yannick is probably more susceptible to the conditions being against him potentially. He's got to figure out what's going on with his cramping, his fitness, and his ability to make it through some of these matches. But I think, I'm not going to hold this loss to Novak against him, for a very long time. I think he got a taste of his own medicine in this match in terms of an opponent being incredibly good on breakpoint saves. Like, I think coming into this match across the course of the entire Australian Open, let's take the Spiteri match out of it because that just doesn't feel like it was a tennis match in the end. But against, through his other four matches, Sinner was 16 out of 16 on breakpoint saves. So he was giving the likes of Ben Shelton, James Duckworth, Darderi, he was giving them opportunities to break, but he went 16 out of 16 on breakpoint saves. Then you get Novak comes along at a big moment, and I think what was it, 16 out of 18 breakpoint saves. So Sinner goes 2 of 18 on conversion. And that became the difference. You look at that last set in particular, I think was it Novak went 8 of 8 saving breakpoints and Sinner went 0 of 1. They're the kind of fine margins that are the difference between a Grand Slam final and, going from being the best player on tour to now being on tour with the greatest of all time.
Set
It's so
set two,
subjective and it's so fine margined.
yeah, no, set two I think was also pretty key for Novak. I've talked about it on the MP9 show. It's been three. I think I mentioned maybe on here as well, but it's been 3 years since we've seen a comeback. Or it'll be 3 years in September since he's come back from down 2 sets, and which was something that up until even recently we just assumed he could do, and now we haven't seen him for a very long time. So I think that second set was crucial for Novak to snag, and on that one, yeah, Sinner went 0 for 4.
And I'm pretty sure at least 3 of those were on a love 40 on Novak's serve
They
directly
were. It
after
was
Novak
where he
broke.
consolidated the break. Yeah.
So, and I think that was the thing that was probably so surprising about it is that, when Novak was able to save those break points, he was able to do it from love 40 and 15-40. Like he was saving bunches in a row. And then, as you said, you hit a moment there where Yannick's going, well, yeah, I'm getting all these opportunities and I can't, break through. And then at the first instance of pressure in that final set, puts a unforced error, which seemed a little bit uncharacteristic for Yannick. But I think, did Yannick only lose? Was it 6 points on serve? I think in that fifth set, Novak had to save 8 break points alone. So It was really, really fine margin stuff. But that's the difference at that top level, and that's the difference over best of 5 sets.
If we were picking between which was the more impressive, the more iconic moment, obviously I think they're probably in the end going to be moments that get mentioned in both players' careers. But uh, what was more impressive, Novak over Sinner or Alcaraz gutting it out in the end? Because I have my take on this one actually.
I think my take is probably Novak over Sinner. Like
100%.
it's that kind of final stand kind of thing of, you know, and look, I was probably guilty last year of, I felt like Novak was playing gatekeeper to the rest of the ATP in terms of like he can't really get past Alcaraz and Sinner at Grand Slam level, but basically everyone else in the draw can't get past Novak. So Novak was kind of making his way deep in these draws, but he was able to find a way. I think he was particularly aggressive with the forehand. Looked terrible early beforehand, but he found his way and kind of recalibrated. But I think that's probably the one. I think Carlos. The thing with the Carlos match is you can say that obviously the 2 hours helped in terms of the third and fourth set. Zverev said if he had his time again, maybe he'd try and do something different instead of trying to go, well, I'm going to extend this match as long as possible. You bring the drop shots in, do an underarm serve. Basically, Zverev needed to get through sets 3 and 4 in half the time. He did. He tried to turn it into a bit of a grind fest at times, and try and kind of tire things out. But that just meant that Alcaraz had more time to recover. That it ended up being cramps. So I would go with Novak out of those two. And it sounds like you agree.
Oh, I totally agree. I'm wearing a Lakers hat, and Kobe's last iconic moment was his 60-point game at the end, and that was a pretty meaningless game. It was just the idea that he could score like that at his age after we had seen him not be peak level for a long time. And this is Novak actually at a very meaningful event. We're talking the semifinals of a Grand Slam and having a 60-point game at this point in his career. I not only do I think that was like the cherry on top of an already historic career, but I feel like it's like opens the idea that he could have even more moments like this because I don't think that we thought he could beat these guys. And this just that match is why we have sports, because it's so defied the odds. I talked about it with you. Like if you run the Sims, I've said this on a couple of days, if you run the Sims with him saving all those break points, and not only that, this is what actually I think it's underplayed was Yannick Sinner did not have a particularly bad match on serve. And that usually is what upends him still to this day, especially in the U.S. Open final. He was particularly bad against Alcaraz, and he was eaten alive on his second serve. He had 75% first in through 5 sets. He had an awesome day on serve and still couldn't come through. So I think if you, like I said, if you run the Sims with the breakpoint chances across the games, because you look at the Musetti Mahaj, Musetti's getting like 8 breakpoint chances in one game. And then at the end, it's like all these chances add up. You look at, the stats don't really tell the whole story because it was like one game he had a bunch. This was like peppered across several games, several sets, saving all of those. And then you throw on top the performance that Sinner actually had on serve. Utter miracle on Rod Laver. Historic match. And, the final ended up being kind of how I thought. It's just going to be so tough for Novak to back up that match with Sinner. And he did a great job coming out hot, winning that first set 6-2.
Yeah.
But I do think he didn't have enough in the end.
Yeah. I think what you can do is when you talk about Novak and his kind of, whether it's his last stand or near last stand, he's taken 3 sets in a row off Sinner and Alcaraz across sets 4 and 5 versus Sinner. And the first set, he was exceptional against Carlos. Like Carlos looked lost in terms of ideas and what to do. I think that was incredible. And look, you make the point about a really good point about this is why we have sports and the appeal. I reckon you could have sat there for it was about 10 and a half hours. What was it across the two semifinals? Like I was glued to the couch until 1:30 in the morning watching Sinner versus Djokovic. Like I had no intention of leaving until that match was over. And I think it probably just shows the importance as well of, for these top guys, Sinner and Carlos, they're going to be fighting for most of the slams, we assume, for the next couple of years. But it shows the importance of the draw. You've got one guy in Carlos who gets Alexander Zverev, who hasn't made that way over the hurdle, semi-final. If Carlos cramps against Novak, he's not getting the same service afforded to him that he got from Zverev. And then you get Sinner, who puts together a pretty serviceable performance statistically, as you've said, and he gets the greatest of all time with 24 Grand Slams at the other end, who finds a way and wins in 5. So it all comes down to who you face and who those opportunities are against. And as you said, we've seen such a shift in the last 48 hours as to the greatest of all time conversation purely off that. If Carlos cramps, Zverev wins in 5 sets and Zverev beats Djokovic, is anyone having anywhere near this conversation?
No.
We were one service game away from it, and that's the thing. That's the way that things can kind of shape out, and it's the beauty of the tennis scoring system is that you're still going to have to serve out at the end.
I also think it was a desperate call for someone else to step up. I mean, Novak can't just like we need someone besides Novak killing himself out there to the point where he can't even, he had that great first set, like I said, but obviously he waned at the end, and it was I actually felt like, wow, is he going to do this again? But when he was broken, it was pretty clear it was over. So I think if we want to continue to have these type of matches, we are going to need someone else to step up. That's another takeaway from me from the weekend. I'm tired of watching Zverev, number one. I really am. I know you mentioned tightening the gap. Great player. Honestly, really great player. Doesn't actually get enough love for how great of a tennis player he is. But we are desperate for someone else to threaten these guys besides Novak Djokovic.
Mm-hmm.
Like drawing every ounce of himself to create another miracle moment for the sport.
Yeah, and I think it just shows as well, through the semifinals and the final, if you're talking greatest of all time or best tennis players, whether it's the men's or the women's or all time together, the men's, they obviously do have a massive benefit because they've got the best of 5. They've got more wriggle room if things go bad. If they drop a set, they're not 1 set from being out the door of the tournament. But no, it was interesting to see Craig Tiley mention that there may be a push moving forward for the women's to be best of 5 from the quarterfinals onwards. But speaking of the women's,
let's move to the women's for sure.
Phenomenal finish, I think, in terms of a tournament, and again, we've seen this time and time again with Aryna Sabalenka, dominant to the final, but it's just getting over that final hurdle a little bit. Elena Rybakina was exceptional, I think, in that final, but it was nice to have the women's match also, or women's tournament also have, a really exciting conclusion in terms of, Rybakina coming right out of the blocks, breaking straight away, and being able to kind of hold on for that first set. The number one in the world, Sabalenka, being able to bounce back and find her way, navigate her way through that, particularly the back end of that second set really strongly, breaking to love, I think it was at 5-4 in the end, and then getting out to a 3-love lead. And I think, if you ask most people who were watching at that point in time what was going to happen there, you just assumed that it was going to be Sabalenka who was going to continue to run away with it, 5 games in a row to get to 3-love in the third. But Rybakina found a way. It was a really, really impressive comeback, I thought.
Yeah, that's the type of parity I think that we're looking for from the men's game that we're not going to get because the top 2 have separated themselves so much. But, having, a nice mix of players that could, I felt like Sabalenka was going to roll to this title, and Rybakina, snatched it.
Yeah, it was it was just nice to see these matches. Both finals and even the semi-finals for the men. Living up to the hype. I think a little bit. No one wants to see a final that's over in 70 minutes. It is one-sided. So I think this was a great response. It's going to be interesting to see where Rybakina goes from here in terms of this year, in terms of being able to kind of push towards, Sabalenka in the rankings. But I think, this is a big step in the right direction. And it probably just brings up, Sabalenka did win the US Open, but there's some fair few finals here that are starting to stack up that are, she's probably gone in as the one you'd expect to win and hasn't come home with the title. So interesting to see how that will affect her moving forward.
Absolutely. All right, Steve. I want to. We're a few days removed. History made over the weekend. History made is going to be the name of the episode. What a weekend! Can I talk about something I'm annoyed about right now? And that is
Go for it.
that Jack Draper skipped Australia to return to Davis Cup action right now. Is that really what's happening? That's where your season debut is going to be, man? Really? Really?
I guess there's not as much on the line.
I get that. Oh, I totally get that. But really? I mean, at least Feast is like doing it at an ATP event in his home country. Like, I know you're representing your country in Davis Cup. I get that. And I get that, in a vacuum, it's very important and there's a lot of lore around it. But, bro, you couldn't have played any time before now. Like, really could have used some Jack Draper in Australia. I'll tell you that, Steve.
Yeah, it was a bit of a funny one. And look, I guess thinking about it is, Jack didn't go deep at the Australian Open last year. That's probably from here on in, the next couple of months is where the majority of his points kind of lie in terms of, what he needs to defend. But yeah, it would have been nice to see him over the best of 5. But also at the same time, I probably wouldn't want to see him, if you go back to last year, play a 5-setter against Navoni and then play a 5-setter against Vukic and then, flame out and have to retire, in round 3 or 4 and then, put the next couple of months in jeopardy. It's probably the smarter move that he's made. And you should see how he goes over the best of 3 and just how he looks in general. But yeah, I think the thing that this tournament, as you said, they're crying out for someone else to stand up and match it against these top guys instead of Novak. When you don't have Draper there, when you don't have Holger Rune there, when you don't have Feast there, when you don't have these guys, there to kind of lay down the challenge, then yeah, a lot's being left to Novak. But I think what we might see this year, I think with that next batch of men's players, and that's Draper included, is I feel like we're going to see them get over the top of either Sinner or get over the top of Alcaraz over the best of 3, perhaps a little bit more. Like I think that they can probably match it for periods. It is just going to be that stretch of, you basically look at it and Novak's given you the example at the Australian Open. To win a Grand Slam, you're probably going to have to go through both of them.
Well, we are entering the portion of the calendar. Last year, we had Jack Draper beat Alcaraz to win on his way to winning the Indian Wells. So that was a surprise. Mira Andreeva did the same on the women's side, dusting Iga Swiatek and Sabalenka, I believe, on her way to the title. So we are more in surprise season. I do think that, we had these electric finishes, but we had the players we thought would probably be there on both the men's and women's side. But now I do think surprises will help tell the story the rest of the way. And a lot of opportunity for players to prove or show who they are with these new eyeballs that these top players are gaining and a chance to become someone's favorite. So we'll see who steps up.
Yeah. Absolutely, and I think, there's a couple of names there. It's gonna be interesting to see who you think is the player. Like, maybe this is a question for people who are watching. Who is going to be the next player to break the top 2 in the ATP rankings for the
I
men?
I'm I have no idea, man. Someone really has to step up. Not
Yeah.
only does someone have to step up, they have to do it in a place where they're gonna get the points at a sustained level to get the points to
Mhm.
do so, and it's got to be someone that's gonna take down a Zverev. Musetti. Look, at this point, I love Lorenzo Musetti, great player, line painter. He's an artist out there. He's got fitness issues,
And
just
that's
like
the thing.
everyone else.
So
They all do. I think that's actually the biggest problem, Steve. We talked about on
yeah,
another show. Everyone in that second tier is like frail.
and that is probably why you could make an argument that the next player to do it is probably gonna be either Alexander Zverev or Felix Auger-Aliassime.
Mm,
And you sit there and go, Felix is probably gonna be able to do it off just pure indoor hard court rankings if he plays every indoor hard court tournament that there is. And if he makes a push past the first round of Roland Garros or Wimbledon, like he's got some room to move, particularly in terms of the end that he had to last year. Obviously, the Australian Open has not helped that situation at all for him. But I think when you look at it, as you said, you've got Mazzetti, you've got Draper, but the beauty with the ranking system is it's a 12-month rolling ranking system, and they just haven't shown that they can be fit for 12 months to be able to kind of entertain that thought.
yeah.
But
Mm.
yeah, let us know in the comments, who do you think is going to be the next player or next couple of players who are capable of breaking the ATP top 2? I'm curious to see what answers we get.
All right. Well, I feel like we had a nice, tidy AO final weekend recap. Let's keep it to that. I did go to the San Diego Open. I want to talk about that, but I'll do that on another show in which we have less on the table in terms of big headlines to discuss, and I can make more of a meal of what I saw. It's also some incredible young talent from the women's game, and Christina Lutova and Pereira. Oh, what a second set that turned out to be to watch. What a privilege to get to go down there. And I'll have a vlog. I'm going to make a vlog this week and put that out there from my day. So if you can get out there to see live tennis at the lower level, I mean, all the headlines were in Australia at the time. Great week of action in San Diego and incredible access to it at the lower level. So
Yeah, and it wasn't the San Diego Open, it was the San Diego Better Buzz Open, wasn't it?
the Better Buzz San Diego
Better Buzz
Open,
San Diego.
correct? Yes, Steve. Thank you for the save.
But no, look,
A
we'll
couple of
maybe we do another.
surfboards were handed out at the end.
Well, maybe we do another episode later this week. We can touch
Absolutely.
on that, and we'll touch on what's been going on around the world in the first week after the AO. Maybe we can talk about Jack Draper if he's played Davis Cup.
So the definitive take on the Australian Open is cool your jets. Just enjoy the moment. Thank you.
No need to compare it. No need to compare it to everything. Actually, I will say this. So, I was watching the final with my wife, and she watches tennis. Not to the same extent as me, but is keen tennis observer. And we were talking about some of the rallies that were taking place in the Alcaraz Djokovic match in terms of the highlight reel stuff that came off that was incredible, particularly early in the kind of first 1.5 sets. And she was like, and she said to me, she's like, is there been tennis like that? Have we seen tennis like that recently in terms of just the quality of some of those points and how good it was? And then about an hour later, I get a notification. She's sent me a reel from Instagram, and it was one of the AO Federer Nadal points. You know how a couple of those ones, I think it's the one that ends with Nadal with the forehand pass down the line, and then there's the Federer one a couple of years later, the open stance backhand, late in the fifth set. And you either go, yeah, well, you know what, there was. And you can go through Nadal versus Fernando Verdasco. You could actually rattle off a whole bunch of them. But yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the moment and think what you're seeing is the best thing you've ever seen. So I think,
Yes.
as you said, cool your jets. We saw history. Let's just enjoy history for what it was. We don't need to compare it.
And also, if you're now a tennis head from this fortnight in Australia, lots of action on the horizon, especially big names. Emma Raducanu picked up a win today. Like there's a lot of action happening as we are recording. So tune in, subscribe. Until next time, see you in the court.